Hey everyone, this is Frank, and today we're going to discuss how to install the Linux operating system. I'll go over the different types of file systems, as well as the standard partitioning scheme that you can use. Now at this point I assume that everyone has a VirtualBox installed, and the Linux distro you want to use downloaded or burned either to a DVD or CD. So let's go ahead and start with creating a virtual system using VirtualBox that we can use to install our operating system on. I'm going to go ahead and start by pressing New, and then Continue. Now, for the name I'm going to use CentOS. So let's type CentOS. Now notice that the OS type operating system and the version were automatically selected for Linux Red Hat. Now, CentOS is a copy of Red Hat, and is considered an enterprise level server operating system. So let's go ahead and press Continue. For RAM, I'm going to leave the default set to 512 megabytes. You can change this to whatever size you want. You can also change the settings to your virtual machine after everything's already set up. So let's press Continue, and let's continue to set up our hard disk. Continue. I'm going to choose dynamically expanding storage. I'm going to go ahead and set my hard disk to 50 gigabytes. Now, the reason I chose dynamically expanded storage and not fixed size is because I only want this hard disk to use as much space as it needs. I don't want it to actually take up the entire 50 gigabytes of space on my actual hard drive. So with dynamically expanding storage, it only uses what it needs. So let's press Continue. And done. And at this point we now have our virtual system set up and ready to use. So let's press Done, and you'll see it pops up on the left there, CentOS. Now, before we get started with installing the actual operating system to our virtual machine, let's discuss some of the different file systems that you may come across, as well as the directory structure of the Linux system. Now, for file systems, we're going to talk a little bit about ext2, ext3 type, ext4, and the riser file systems. For ext2, very popular, it's known as a second extended file system. It stores data in a hierarchical fashion with a maximum file size of 2 terabytes and a maximum volume size of 4 terabytes. Now, there's an issue with ext2 that when there's, let's say, a power failure in your server or computer shut down improperly, in order for the system to boot back up, it needs to go through and check the entire system using this utility called E2 FS check, CHK. Now, this could take hours depending on the amount of data that you have on the system. So if you're using it as a file server with gigs of data, it would have to go through all of those files to make sure everything's okay. So now to solve this issue, ext3 was developed, third extended file system. Now it uses many of the same utilities as ext2, and you can upgrade or downgrade between ext2 and 3 easily. Now, the one feature that it offers that ext2 didn't have was journaling. Now, with journaling, it logs each transaction that it's registering every transaction that the computer does. So first it registers as incomplete, and then as it completes those tasks, it marks it as complete. Now, in case of an improper shutdown, when you're booting the system back up, it only needs to check the incomplete transactions. So this saves a lot of time on the boot up. But with this, you do have some cons now. You get decreased system performance, since ext3 now uses more system memory, and then it also slows down your disk input and output operations since it has to write everything through these transaction logs. Another file system that was created later on was ext4, the fourth extended file system. It's also backwards compatible with ext2 and 3, and a maximum file size of 16 terabytes with a maximum volume size of 1 exabyte. Now, what's interesting about ext4 is that it has a 64,000 subdirectory limitation or file limitation. Now, unlike where ext2 and 3 both had a 32,000 file limit, so you can actually store a lot more now per folder. And the next file system we're going to talk about is the riser file system. It also utilizes journaling. It uses a completely different file system type than the ext file systems. It's faster than the ext file systems and also has a maximum file size of 8 terabytes and a maximum volume size of 16 terabytes. So now let's talk a little bit about the directory structure for a Linux system. And so really your partition scheme should be planned out before installing your system. It's recommended that you have multiple partitions just to ensure your system stability. You should really have a partition for each of the following directories: the root directory, the boot directory, the home directory, the op directory, the temp directory, and the user directory, and the var directory, as well as the swap. Now, the root directory, you need at least, it's recommended that you have at least 4 gigabytes of space or larger. This is your topmost directory in the tree, hierarchical tree. Pretty much everything starts from the root. It's also denoted as a /. Then we have the boot directory, which contains your Linux system files, such as your current Linux kernel. This should only be recommended at least 100 to 200 megabytes of space. The next partition that we would make would be for the home directory. This stores all of your user account data and user files. So any downloads that a user account may have, or images, anything that they're storing, would be stored into their home directory. So you want to make sure it's large enough to accommodate, the user's data. The next directory would be the op directory, /opt. This stores all the application files installed. Now this should also be large enough to accommodate the applications that use this directory. The next directory we're going to talk about is the /tmp, temp. Now this stores temporary files, and you want to give it about maybe 1 gigabyte of space or more. Another directory is the /usr, which stores all your system utilities. Now, for this one, you should at least give it 5 gigabytes of space or larger, depending on how many packages you want to install to your system. Lastly, the last directory, the var directory /var, this stores all of your system's log files. It should also be about 3 gigabytes of space or larger, since log files can get pretty big pretty quick. The last partition we want to make is the swap partition. Now, this should be at least double the size of your system's memory or more. So for instance, for this virtual setup, I use 512 megabytes of RAM, so I would want to use 1024 megabytes of space for my swap partition. So now that we went over the directory structure and how we should set up our partitions, and some of the file systems, let's go ahead and start installing the operating system. So I'm going to go ahead and press on the CentOS virtual machine that we created, and then press Settings. So now I'm going to go ahead and click on Storage, and I'm going to click on the empty CD-ROM. Now the reason I'm doing this is because I didn't actually burn a CD or DVD. I'm just going to run the install directly from an ISO file that I have on my desktop. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the little disk image here and choose virtual CD DVD disk file. I'm going to go ahead and choose my ISO file and then press open. Then I'm going to press OK. And I'm going to go ahead and press start. Now you'll notice that it boots automatically from the ISO file that I had on my desktop. I'm going to go ahead and press enter to begin the installation. Just give it a minute. Alright, so the first prompt that you'll get is a media test. I'm going to go ahead and press tab to get to the skip button, because I'm not going to actually run the test. Now, for a live environment, before you set up the environment, you'd want to run the test just to make sure that nothing's wrong with the actual disk that you're installing. For this example, I'm just going to go ahead and skip that, press enter, give it another minute. And now you should be brought to the CentOS main page. So the first thing you'll see is the CentOS with some icons and a next button. Let's go ahead and press next. I'm going to choose English as my language and a US English type keyboard. Now you guys can choose whatever your language and keyboard type are, and then press next. Alright, this is going to initialize the drive, erasing all data. We don't have any data, it's just a virtual drive that we created. So let's just go ahead and press yes. And for the partitioning scheme, I'm going to go ahead and create a custom layout. Press next. And then you'll see we have the 50 gigabyte virtual drive that we set up earlier. I'm going to click on free and then click new. Now for my example install, I'm just going to create 3 partitions. One for the root directory, one for the boot directory, and one for my swap. Now the reason I'm only setting up 3 is that way I can show you later on how to create more partitions once we're in the actual operating system. By default, you can only have 4 primary partitions on an actual Linux operating system. So I'm going to leave one open. That way we can use it later on after the install is complete. So let's go ahead and create our boot partition first. ext3. I'm going to go ahead and give it 200 megabytes of space, and then press OK. I'm going to click on free, then click new. We'll create one for our root directory, and I'll give this one 10,000 megabytes of space. Press OK. Lastly, let's create one for our swap partition. Create new. This one does not have a mount point. Instead, you just choose swap. And since I use 512 megabytes of RAM for this system, I'm going to make my swap partition 1024 megabytes. Let's press OK. And now we have our partition set up. And let's go ahead and press next. We're going to use the defaults. Grub loader. Press next. We're going to leave the defaults on here. This is just enabling DHCP. Press next. I'm going to leave the defaults there. I'm in Eastern time. You guys can change it to whatever region you guys are in. Press next. For my root password, I'm just going to use password. In a live environment, you want to make a password that's a lot more secure, something that's hard to remember, maybe something that you even don't remember, but have saved somewhere securely. Let's go ahead and press next. For the packages, I'm just going to leave the default set as GNOME. We'll go ahead and customize it later, add more packages. I'm going to show you how to custom compile packages as well as install them using yum or RPMs. Let's go ahead and press next. Give it a second. Alright, so now the next step we're going to do is just press next, and this will begin our entire installation of the CentOS operating system. So I'm just going to go ahead and press next. So now this, depending on your system, it may take from 15 to 30 minutes to go through this process. So just take a break, let it run, and then come back. Alright, welcome back everybody. Now your CentOS operating system should be installed, and you should have the message saying congratulations, the installation is complete. So let's go ahead and reboot our system. Let it run through the shutdown process. Just give it another minute. Alright, so after your reboot's finished, you'll be brought to the last part of the installation. So let's go ahead and press forward. For firewall, let's disable the firewall for now. We'll go more into security and adding the firewall later on in the course. Let's go ahead and press forward. Yes. For the SC Linux, I'm going to also disable this. This is just another security measure that we'll also go over later on in the course. Press forward. Press yes. Set your default, set your date and time settings, and then press forward. For the username, I'm just going to leave it blank. I'll show you guys how to create users later on in the course as well. So let's just go ahead and press forward. By default, we already have our root user. Continue. This is just the settings for your sound card. Let's just press forward and finish. And then your system will go into another reboot. So let's do that and give it a minute. Alright, so after the reboot completes, then you'll be brought to the prompt to enter your username, and then after your username, your password. So the username I'm going to use is root, and the password as we created earlier is password. Press enter, and it should log you right into the system. So now we have our virtual system installed as well as our operating system set up. Thanks for watching.